I never imagined that a simple dinner invitation would completely change my life at 67. Betrayal hurts at any age, but when it comes from your own child, a mother's heart shatters in a way I can't put into words. I'm Ivone Medeiros, and today I'm going to share with you the story that taught me that respect isn't begged for, it's earned. It all started on an ordinary Thursday. The sky in Sao Paulo was cloudy, just like it has been lately. Just like my heart since my husband Antonio left us 5 years ago, and since then, my son Rafael has been drifting away. At first, I thought it was just his way of grieving, different from mine. Then, I considered it might be his wife, Patricia's influence, that girl who never hid that she tolerated me only out of obligation. But deep down, I always refused to see the truth that was right in front of me. My son had changed. That morning, I woke up with a sudden urge to reconnect, to break down that invisible barrier that had grown between us. I decided to call him and invite him for a special dinner at Sabor e Marte, a fancy restaurant here in Jardim Paulista. It was the anniversary of his father's passing, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to get closer again, to reminisce about the good times we had as a family. I grabbed my phone, the one Rafael insisted I replace with a more modern one on my last birthday. Ironically, it was this very device that later allowed me to uncover the truth. I dialed his number, feeling that familiar anxiety of not knowing if the call would be well received. "Hello, Mom," his voice sounded distant and hurried. "Rafael, my son, how are you? I'm calling to invite you to dinner tonight. It's been a while since we really talked." I tried to sound casual, hiding how much that invitation meant to me. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear voices in the background. Someone talking to him. Maybe Patricia. "Not today, Mom. I already had dinner," he replied curtly. "I have a lot of work piled up. I need to stay at the office late." I felt that familiar pang of disappointment, but years as a nurse taught me not to show when something hurts. "That's okay, son. Maybe next time." I hung up and stared out the window of my apartment in the sod neighborhood. The plants I grow on the balcony swayed in the gentle breeze. So many memories in that place, so many family dinners, conversations around the table, plans for the future. Antonio always said I was strong, that I faced life head-on. "Ivone, you have a warrior spirit," he used to say. In that moment, I decided to honor those words. I won't sit here alone wallowing in sadness, I thought. I took a long shower. I chose my navy blue dress, the one Antonio always complimented, and put on my favorite perfume. I styled my gray hair, which I carry with pride, each strand representing a story, a struggle, a victory. I looked in the mirror and smiled at my own reflection. I'm still here. I'm still standing. I took a taxi to the restaurant. The driver, a friendly gentleman named Benedito, struck up a conversation during the ride. We talked about the city, how Sao Paulo never sleeps, how people seem to grow more distant from each other, even while living so close. "Are you going to meet someone special?" he asked with a gentle smile in the rearview mirror. "I'm going to find myself," I replied. And we both laughed at that improvised philosophy. The atmosphere in the art venue was lively that night. Soft lights, ambient music, clinking glasses, and the murmur of conversations filled the air. I approached the receptionist, a young woman with a warm smile. "Table for one, please," I said. She quickly checked her tablet. "Of course, ma'am, right this way." As I followed her between the tables, my eyes scanned the room. That's when my heart stopped for a moment. There he was, Rafael, my son, sitting at a table in the back, next to Patricia and her mother, Odette. The three of them were laughing animatedly, wine glasses in hand, plates of food piled in front of them. This wasn't a last-minute dinner, it was a planned celebration. The receptionist noticed I had stopped midway. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" I couldn't respond. My eyes were fixed on that scene that felt like a nightmare. That's when Rafael saw me. Our eyes met, and for a second, I saw panic in his. But then something happened that I would never forget. He leaned in and said something to the two women. All three heads turned in my direction, and they laughed, as if it were some kind of joke. I felt the blood drain from my face. My legs weakened, but I stood firm. A lifetime of caring for people in hospitals taught me not to crumble in moments of crisis. The receptionist, sensing something was wrong, gently touched my arm. "Ma'am, have you changed your mind?" I managed to say, "I need to use the restroom first." She pointed me the way, and I walked away. My legs felt heavy, my heart even heavier. In the elegant, empty restroom, I leaned against the marble sink and faced my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was no longer the competent one who had left home. She was a betrayed woman, humiliated by her own son. I took deep breaths, trying to organize my thoughts. That's when I remembered the words my father used to say when I was little back in Minas Gerais. "Ivone, when life knocks you down, you have two options: stay on the ground crying or get up and show who's in charge." In that moment, something shifted inside me. A determination I didn't know still existed began to burn in my chest. It wasn't just about that night, that dinner. It was about years of little dismissals, being put second, having my kindness and maternal love exploited and then discarded when they were no longer convenient. I took my phone from my bag and started typing a message. My fingers had never been so quick and precise. It was time to show Raphael that his mother wasn't just an old lady who could be fooled and ridiculed. It was time to remind him that the house he lived in, the cars he drove, the money he managed so arrogantly, none of it would be his if it weren't for me and his father. I sent the message and waited for the delivery confirmation. When it arrived, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I adjusted my dress, touched up my lipstick, took a deep breath, and left the restroom, not as a victim, but as someone ready to turn the tables. As I walked toward their table, each step I took seemed to echo within my chest. The memories of a lifetime dedicated to family flashed before my eyes like a movie. I remembered when Raphael was born, so small and fragile, how I cried with joy holding him for the first time. I recalled the sleepless nights when he had a fever, his first steps, his first word, the graduations we celebrated together. How did we get to this point? As I approached the table, their smiles gradually froze. Raphael looked away, unable to meet my gaze. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Odette, my dear co-mother-in-law, wore that air of superiority that always bothered me. "What a surprise to find you here," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. "Especially you, son, who just told me you had already eaten and would be working late." The silence that followed was deafening. Other restaurant patrons continued their lively conversations, oblivious to the drama unfolding at our table. Raphael finally cleared his throat, adjusting the expensive tie I had given him last Christmas. "Mom, this was unexpected. Patricia and Mrs. Odette called me later, and well, I thought Rudd would decline." "But wasn't it Rudd who declined your mother's invitation, the woman who spent 16 hours in labor to bring you into this world?" My voice came out louder than I intended, causing a few heads to turn our way. It was Odette who responded with that condescending tone that sent shivers down my spine. "Ivone, dear, don't make a scene. Raphael is an adult now, with a wife and responsibilities. He can't always be available at your beck and call." I took a deep breath, feeling the blood boil in my veins. In other times, I would have swallowed those words, apologized, and left, but not that night. That night, something inside me had broken or perhaps finally been set free. "Funny you mention responsibilities, Odette. By the way, are you celebrating something special today?" I asked, pulling out a chair and sitting down uninvited. The three exchanged nervous glances. It was Patricia who answered, adjusting her perfectly dyed blonde hair. "Actually, we are. We just finalized the purchase of that land on the coast. We're going to build our beach house." Those words hit me like a slap. The land on the coast, that piece of land in Guarujá that Antonio and I dreamed of building our retirement home on. The dream we never realized because the money was used to pay for Raphael's medical school, which he dropped out of in his third year to pursue a career in real estate. "Did you buy the land in Guarujá using the money from selling your father's company shares?" I asked directly to Raphael, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Mom, it's an investment. You never understood much about business, but I'm growing the wealth. Growing it for whom, Raphael? For you and your new family, while I live in that two-bedroom apartment, counting pennies so I don't have to ask you for money? His expression changed, a mix of irritation and shame. You never needed anything. I always took care of everything. Took care of everything? I let out a bitter laugh. Let me tell you something. 3 months ago, I had to have cataract surgery. I called you 5 times that week, Raphael. 5 times. In all of them, you were too busy. Do you know who took me to the hospital? Who stayed by my side during recovery? It was Antenor, the owner of the neighborhood bookstore. A man I had known for less than a year showed more care than my own son. Patricia rolled her eyes, always dramatizing, Mrs. Ivone. Raphael works hard to maintain our standard of living. I repeated, feeling a strange calm wash over me. Interesting that you use that pronoun, Patricia, because as far as I know, the one maintaining your standard of living is the money Antonio left behind. Money that, by the way, is in accounts under my name. At that moment, the waiter Joaquim approached, visibly embarrassed to interrupt the tense conversation. Would you like anything else? Yes, I replied with a smile. Bring me a sparkling wine, please, the best you have. I'm about to celebrate a discovery. When Joaquim walked away, I turned my attention back to the 3 of them, who were looking at me with expressions ranging from shock to disdain. That's when I began to realize that the situation was even worse than I imagined. It wasn't just about that dinner, that specific lie. It was a pattern that had been developing for years, ever since Antonio passed away. I remembered how Raphael gradually took control of everything, the bills, the investments, the properties. At first, I was grateful. After all, I had never been good with numbers and finances. My whole life, I had dedicated myself to nursing, caring for people, not paperwork. Besides, I was devastated by the loss of my partner of 4 decades. Raphael seemed to be just trying to help, to spare me from worries, but little by little, I noticed subtle changes. Weekly visits became monthly, daily calls became rare. When I asked about the investments, I received vague answers filled with technical terms I didn't understand. Don't worry, Mom. Everything is under control. And I, foolishly, believed him because he was my son, my only son, the boy I breastfed, whose scraped knees I healed, whose tears I dried. How could I suspect him? It was Mariana, my hairdresser friend, who first raised the alarm. Ivone, don't you find it strange that your son lives in a mansion in Murumbai while you live in a small apartment? Wasn't the money from your husband? That question haunted me for days. I started paying more attention, asking more specific questions. Raphael grew irritated, defensive. You don't trust me, Mom, after everything I do for you. The last straw came when I accidentally discovered he had sold the property in Atabaya, the place where Antonio and I spent every weekend, where we grew our own vegetables and picked fruit straight from the trees, the place where we planned to spend our old age together. When I questioned Raphael, he said the property was losing money, that it was a bad investment, but I knew the truth. He wanted the money for his own projects, his own dreams, dreams that didn't include me. That's when I sought out Dr. Gustavo Macedo, a lawyer recommended by Mariana. To my surprise and relief, I discovered that despite Raphael managing everything, the assets were still legally in my name. Antonio had been careful in structuring his will, including protective clauses. Your husband must have anticipated some possibility of future problems, Dr. Gustavo explained. With his guidance, I began to gather documents, to better understand my real financial situation, to prepare an action plan in case things worsened. I never imagined I would need to use it so soon or in such a dramatic way. Back to that night at the restaurant, while the 3 of them stared at me in silence, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Dr. Gustavo. Procedure initiated, as per your instructions. Blocks effective in 15 minutes. I smiled to myself. Joaquim returned with the glass of sparkling wine, placing it gently in front of me. I raised the glass in a silent toast. "Mom, what are you up to?" Raphael's voice was tense, suspicious, "Just celebrating the truth, son. You know, for a long time I convinced myself that your distance was just a phase, that you were busy building your career, your family. I convinced myself it was normal for a son to drift away from an elderly mother, especially when he has a wife who clearly despises me." Patricia opened her mouth to protest, but I raised my hand, silencing her. "No, dear, let me finish. For too long, I swallowed my tears, my loneliness, my pain. I pretended not to notice the looks of disdain, the flimsy excuses, the increasingly frequent lies. But do you know what happens when we swallow our emotions for too long? They come back with a vengeance." I took a sip of the sparkling wine, feeling the cold liquid slide down my throat, bringing a comforting sense of courage. 3 months ago, I started investigating what was really happening with your father's money. I discovered some interesting things, Raphael, like the fact that you diverted almost 2 million reais to personal accounts. Like the fact that you were selling family properties without my real knowledge, using powers of attorney I signed trusting you. His face paled. Odette clutched her designer bag tightly, as if preparing to flee. "Mom, that's not true. I can explain every transaction." Each was interrupted by the sound of his own phone. Then Patricia's rang, and Odette's too. The three of them grabbed their devices simultaneously, their faces reflecting a growing panic as they read the messages. "What did you do?" Raphael almost shouted, drawing curious glances from nearby tables. "I simply regained control of what is rightfully mine," I replied calmly. "At this moment, all bank accounts are frozen, credit cards cancelled, powers of attorney revoked. The car you drove here is no longer in your name. The mansion in Murumbai. You have 48 hours to vacate it." Patricia let out a strangled sound, something between a sob and a scream. "You can't do this." "Actually, I can. It's all in my name. Remember? You and your husband lived off my money, mocking me behind my back, treating me like a foolish, inconvenient old woman." Odette stood up abruptly. "This is absurd, Raphael, do something." But Raphael looked petrified, his face a mask of horror, as more notifications came to his phone. I could imagine what they were, alerts from the bank, from the property manager, maybe even from your accountant warning about the drastic changes happening. "You don't realize, do you?" I continued, feeling a renewed strength. "Don't you realize how much you've hurt me? Not just today, not just with this specific lie, but with every family dinner you cancelled at the last minute, with every birthday you forgot, with every time I needed help and you were too busy." Tears began to stream down Raphael's face, something I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. "Mom, please, can we talk about this? Can I explain everything now? Do you want to talk now that the money is gone? Now that your house of cards has fallen apart?" "No, Raphael, we've moved past the talking stage." Claudia, the restaurant manager, approached discreetly. "Is everything okay here?" "Perfectly fine," I replied with a smile. "Actually, I would like to pay the bill for this table." Raphael didn't protest. "I'll pay our bill." Claudia looked at him, then at me, clearly sensing the tension. "Sir, your card was declined when you tried to pay for the appetizer. There might be an issue with the bank." Raphael's face went even paler, if that was possible. Patricia started to cry openly now, while Odette looked like she was about to have a meltdown. As I said, I spoke, handing my card to Claudia. "I will pay the bill. Consider it my last gift to you." When Claudia walked away, I leaned forward, looking directly into my son's eyes. "You know what hurts me the most, Raphael? It's not the money. It never was the money. It's knowing that my only son, the boy I raised with so much love, has become a man capable of lying, deceiving, and humiliating his own mother." "Was it her?" He pointed at Patricia, who gasped in shock. "She always thought you were too controlling, that we needed to distance ourselves." "Don't you dare blame me," Patricia hissed. You always complained that your mother was controlling, that we needed our space. And thus began a bitter argument between them, throwing blame at each other, revealing painful truths that at another time would have broken my heart. But that night, strangely, I felt only a deep peace, as if I could finally see the situation clearly, without the veil of unconditional love that had always blinded me. I stood up calmly, leaving them in their increasingly heated argument. I grabbed my purse and headed for the exit, where Antenor was waiting for me, as we had arranged earlier. He smiled at me with kind eyes, full of concern. "How was it, Ivone? Are you okay?" I looked back one last time at the table where my son and his family continued to argue. I bid them farewell as I left. A strange sense of lightness washed over me, Antenor. I think for the first time in many years, I am truly okay. He offered his arm, which I accepted with a smile. As we walked out of the restaurant into the warm São Paulo night, I realized that this dinner didn't mark the end of something, but the beginning, the start of my liberation, my ability to finally put myself first, to demand the respect I have always deserved. What would happen next was still uncertain. Raphael would likely try to contest my actions. He might even seek me out regretful when the dust settled. But one thing I knew for sure. That Ivone who accepted everything, who diminished herself to avoid bothering others, who swallowed humiliations with a smile, that Ivone was left behind at the Sabor e Marte restaurant. That night, as the taxi took us through the city's illuminated streets, I told Antenor everything that had happened. Every detail, every emotion, every revelation. He listened in silence, occasionally squeezing my hand in support. "What will you do now?" he asked when I finished my story. I looked out the window, watching the buildings rush by, lights that seemed like earthly stars. An idea began to form in my mind. An idea about how to use my reclaimed assets for something meaningful, something that could help other women in similar situations. "Now," I replied with a determined smile, "I will show my son and the world that a 67-year-old woman's life doesn't end when she's betrayed. In fact, that's when it truly begins." The next morning, after that night that changed everything, I woke up with a strange feeling. The sun streamed through the gaps in my bedroom curtains, casting golden patterns on the wooden floor. For a few seconds, before reality hit me fully, I felt that peace that only comes with dawn. Then, like a film rewinding, the images of dinner, the shocked expressions, the feeling of finally taking back control of my life, all came rushing back. I sat up in bed, looking at the portrait of Antonio on my nightstand. "Did you see this, my old friend?" I murmured to the photograph. "You always said I would explode one day." I could almost hear his warm laughter, the kind that made his eyes disappear into the wrinkles of his smile. "Antonio always said I held on to too much, that I needed to assert myself more. 'Ivone, you are strong as an oak, but bend like bamboo in the wind,' he used to say." The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. I looked at the screen. It was Mariana, my hairdresser friend. I answered with a voice still hoarse from sleep. "Ivone, for heaven's sake, what happened? The whole city is talking." I sat up straight, suddenly alert. "What do you mean, Mari? What are you talking about?" "About the scandal at Sabor e Marte. Joaquim Garcam is my brother-in-law's cousin. He said you left your son, daughter-in-law, and her mother completely desperate. He said you blocked everything, cards, accounts, even the car they couldn't use to leave." I sighed deeply. I hadn't expected the news to spread so quickly. But São Paulo, despite its size, sometimes felt like a small town when it came to gossip. "It's true," I admitted, feeling a strange mix of pride and apprehension. After years of enduring disrespect and manipulation, I finally took a stand. "Oh, friend, I'm shocked, but also a bit proud. I always thought that daughter-in-law was a viper. And Raphael? Well, he's changed so much since he got married. But tell me, what are you going to do now?" The question hung in the air for a few seconds. What would I do now? Until that moment, my plan had been simply to regain control of my assets, to teach my son and his family a lesson. But what then? I hadn't thought much beyond that. I don't know exactly, Mari. I think first I need to sort everything out with Dr. Gustavo, understand exactly what I have, what was lost, what I can recover. Do you want me to come by later? We can talk more. I brought that dye you like. We can do your hair while we catch up. I smiled, thankful for true friends amidst so much deceit. It would be great. Mari, come over for lunch. I'll make that lasagna you love. After hanging up, I sat on the bed for a few minutes, deep in thought. The phone rang again. It was Raphael. I ignored it. It rang once more. And again? And again. On the fifth try, I decided to answer. Hello. My voice came out stronger than I expected. Mom? His voice was choked, as if he had cried all night. We need to talk. You can't do this to us. We have nowhere to go. A pang of guilt hit me. That maternal instinct that never fully disappears, no matter how hurt you are. But then I remembered the laughter, the disdain, years of being treated like an inconvenience. Do you have Odette's apartment in Tatuape? I replied curtly, the one she keeps hidden to rent out short-term. Or maybe you could ask one of those wealthy friends you love to play golf with on Sundays while telling me you're too busy to visit. How do you know about her apartment? He sounded genuinely surprised. There are many things I know, Raphael, things you think you've hidden well from me. The old fool isn't that foolish. There was silence on the other end. Then his voice changed. It was no longer pleading, but angry. You'll regret this, Mom. You can't just leave us on the street. I have rights to that property. No, you don't. It's all in my name, just as your father left it. You were only managing it with my permission. Permission that has just been revoked. I'll contest this legally. I have powers of attorney, documents, powers of attorney revoked last night. I calmly interrupted. And about those documents, well, many of them have signatures that a good expert would easily identify as forged. Do you really want to take this to court, Raphael? Are you sure you want everything to come to light? The misappropriations, the unauthorized sales, the secret accounts? Another silence, longer this time. When he finally spoke, his voice was defeated. What do you want, Mom? I want time. Time to decide what to do with you, with the property, with everything. For now, you and Patricia can stay in the apartment that used to belong to my mother in Piñeros. It's small, but it has what you need. The keys are with Dr. Gustavo. You'll have a modest allowance, but enough to get by while you reorganize your lives. An allowance, as if we were children. Just like you treated me, like a child who doesn't understand money, who needs to be protected from her own decisions. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have appointments. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was a mix of adrenaline and a strange sense of liberation. For years, I lived in the shadow of my son, allowing him to make decisions for me, to belittle me, to treat me like a burden. That phone call marked the end of that dynamic. I got up and went to the bathroom. I looked at my reflection in the mirror while brushing my teeth. The woman looking back at me seemed different. The same gray hair, the same wrinkles marking time on my face, but there was something new in my eyes, a spark I hadn't seen in a long time. After a refreshing shower, I dressed carefully. I picked out a dress that had been tucked away in the back of my closet for years, a turquoise blue one, with an elegant cut that flattered my figure. Antonio always loved to see me in that color. It matches your eyes, he would say. I completed the look with a pearl necklace I received for our 40th wedding anniversary, just a few months before he passed. While I was having my breakfast on the balcony, enjoying the morning sun, my phone rang again. It was Dr. Gustavo. Good morning, Dona Ivone. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, doctor. At my age, we wake up with the birds. He chuckled briefly. Well, I have news. We managed to block all the accounts and cards as planned. The revocation of the powers of attorney has been registered. As for the properties, we've already notified the management company about the change of ownership and control. And regarding the sales Raphael made without my real authorization, the site in Atabaya, the land in the countryside, we are investigating. Some we may be able to recover by proving there was fraud in the transfers. Others, unfortunately, will be more difficult, especially if the buyers acted in good faith, but we will definitely secure financial compensation. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. And what about the apartment in Piñeros? Has Raphael been in touch? Yes. He and his wife came early. They seemed fine, not at their best, but the keys were handed over, and I explained the conditions as we agreed. Thank you, Doctor. And what about the other matter we discussed? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Ah, yes, about the foundation. I've already started the process. It's a bit lengthy, but perfectly feasible. We can meet later this week to discuss the details if you prefer. That would be great. How about Thursday at your office? After we settled the details and hung up, I sat there, contemplating the city stretching below my apartment, Sao Paulo, always bustling, always in motion. For so long, I felt lost in that whirlwind, especially after Antonio was gone. But now a new idea was beginning to take shape in my mind, the foundation, a project that emerged during my conversations with Dr. Gustavo as we planned how to recover my assets. At first, it was just a way to reorganize my belongings, maybe gain some tax benefits, but gradually it transformed into something bigger, more meaningful, an organization to help elderly women who are victims of financial and emotional abuse by family members. A place where they could find legal, psychological, and financial support to free themselves from situations like the one I lived through, because I knew I wasn't alone. There were thousands of Yvonnes out there, women who dedicated their lives to their families only to be discarded when they became inconvenient. The phone rang again, interrupting my thoughts. It was Antenor. Ivy, I hope I'm not bothering you so early. I smiled at the sound of his gentle voice. Antenor had entered my life so unexpectedly. One day, I walked into his little bookstore looking for a crochet book to pass the time. We ended up talking for hours about literature, music, life. He, like me, was a widower. He understood the loneliness, the emptiness that comes when you lose a partner of decades. Not at all, Antenor. In fact, I was thinking of calling you. I wanted to thank you for last night. There's no need to thank me. I was worried. How are you feeling today? I paused for a moment before responding. Strangely well, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. A bit guilty too, I confess. After all, he is my son. The blame isn't yours, Ivone. You gave him every chance to do the right thing. He made his choices. I nodded silently. Yes, you're right. And now? I need to make mine. Any plans for today? I thought maybe we could have lunch together. There's a new Italian restaurant near the bookstore that's supposed to be excellent. I smiled, feeling a warm glow in my chest. I'd love to, but I've already made plans with Mariana to have lunch here. She wants to know all the details of the big scandal, as she's calling it. But I'm free for coffee in the afternoon if the invitation stands. It certainly does. I'll pick you up at 4. After hanging up, I finished my coffee and decided I needed to go out, walk a bit, organize my thoughts. I grabbed my bag and headed down to the Aerolucarias Square, my daily refuge since I moved to the health neighborhood. The air was fresh, typical of an autumn morning in Sao Paulo. I sat on my usual bench, watching the children playing under the watchful eyes of nannies and grandparents. An elderly lady, perhaps older than me, was trying to teach her granddaughter to ride a bike. The scene brought a pang of sadness. I would never have those moments with my grandchildren, if Raphael and Patricia ever had kids. That's when I noticed a woman sitting alone on another bench, her gaze distant. Something in her expression caught my attention. There was pain there, loneliness. I recognized it because it was the same look I'd seen in the mirror for so many years. Without thinking much, I stood up and walked over to her. "Good morning. Do you mind if I sit?" She looked up, surprised. "No, of course not." I sat down and we remained silent for a few minutes, just watching the square, life happening around us. "My name is Ivone," I finally said. "Helena," she replied with a small smile. "I come here every day." "I've never seen you before." Helena sighed. "I don't usually go out much, but today I needed some air, you know? Sometimes it feels like the walls at home are going to suffocate me." I nodded, fully understanding the feeling. "Problems?" She hesitated, obviously not used to opening up to strangers. But there was something in the moment, in the quiet of the morning, in the fact that we were two gray-haired women sitting in a square that created an immediate connection. "My son," she finally said, "he wants me to sell my house and move to a smaller place, more suitable for a lady of my age. What he really wants is the money from the sale." Something ignited within me. It was like hearing my own story told by another voice. "And what do you want, Helena?" She seemed surprised by the question, as if no one had cared about her opinion in a long time. "I want to stay in my house. I raised my children there. My husband and I built every corner with so much love. I don't want to spend my last years in a tiny apartment, far from everything I know." In that moment, like a flash of clarity, I knew exactly what I needed to do. The foundation wouldn't just be an idea, a distant project, it would be real, tangible, necessary, because there were many Helenas out there, many Ivones, women whose voices had been silenced, whose desires had been ignored, whose hard-earned legacies were being contested as if they were no longer there. "Helena," I said, taking a card from my bag and writing my phone number on the back. "Would you like to grab a coffee with me sometime? I have a story to tell you, and maybe together we can write a new chapter." She took the card, confused but intrigued. "Yes, I would." I stood up, feeling a renewed determination. "Excellent. Now I need to go. I have lunch with a friend, and then I have a lifetime to reorganize." Walking back home, with lighter steps than I had in years, I realized that what happened at the Sabor Marte restaurant was not the end of a story, but the beginning of many others, the moment I decided not just to reclaim my legacy, but to use it to make a difference. The moment I realized that my voice, my experience, my pain could turn into strength for other women. And for the first time since Antonio left, I felt I had a purpose again. I was no longer just someone's widow, someone's mother. I was Ivone Medeiros, a 67-year-old woman who was just beginning her most important journey. Mariana arrived right on time for lunch, bringing not only the dye she had promised but also a chocolate-covered carrot cake, which I knew was my favorite. As soon as I opened the door, she hugged me tightly, as if trying to convey through that gesture all the support that words couldn't express. "You look amazing," she exclaimed as she looked me over. "That turquoise dress? When was the last time I saw it? And there's something different in your eyes, Ivone. A new energy." I smiled, leading her into the apartment. That's what happens when we finally free ourselves from chains we didn't even know we were carrying. The table was already set on the balcony, enjoying the privileged view my apartment had of the city. Although small, the place in the Saud neighborhood was well located, on the 10th floor of an old but well-maintained building. From there, we could see the green of Ibirapura Park in the distance, contrasting with the gray of the buildings. "So, tell me everything in detail," Mariana began as I served the lasagna I had prepared. "How did you plan this? For how long? And how did you find the courage?" I poured us a glass of white wine, something I rarely did during the day, but the occasion seemed to call for a little celebration. "The courage came from the pain, Mari, from the repeated humiliation, the daily small betrayals, the growing sense of invisibility. You know how it is. We are taught to erase ourselves, to put others first, especially our children. For years, I thought that was love, a necessary sacrifice, but there's a fine line between love and submission, between generosity and exploitation. Raphael crossed that line a long time ago. I just took a while to realize it. Mariana nodded, her eyes attentive, fixed on me as I spoke. As a hairdresser for over 30 years, she joked that she was half beauty professional, half therapist. Women tell me things they don't even confess to their priests, she used to say. And what about the account blocks? How did you manage to do everything so quickly? I took a sip of wine before answering. It started about 3 months after that cataract surgery I had. Raphael didn't even show up to pick me up from the hospital. That's when I realized something was deeply wrong. So, I sought out Dr. Gustavo Macedo, a lawyer specializing in family law. He helped me understand my legal situation, confirming that the assets were still in my name, even though Raphael managed everything. And he never suspected, did he? I shook my head. Raphael was so confident in his control, so sure I was just an old fool, that he never considered I might be acting behind his back. Meanwhile, Dr. Gustavo and I prepared everything. The revocation of powers of attorney, the freezing of accounts, the reclaiming of properties. All set to be activated with a single phone call. And that call happened last night from the restaurant bathroom. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Exactly. When I saw them laughing at me, something inside me just broke. Or maybe it pieced itself back together, I don't know. But I knew it was the moment. I called Dr. Gustavo and said just one word. Now it was the signal we had agreed upon. Mariana let out a low whistle of admiration, and then, how was it confronting them? I closed my eyes for a moment, reliving the scene. When I returned to their table, Raphael was already receiving the first notifications on his phone, panic written all over his face. I confess I felt a satisfaction I never imagined I could feel. It wasn't about revenge, you see? It was about justice, about balance being restored. And what did you tell them? The truth, that they were reaping what they had sown, that years of disrespect and manipulation had come to an end, that the house they lived in, the cars they drove, the credit cards they used for their extravagances, everything was now frozen or in the process of being reversed. And they, Patricia, started to cry. That fake cry, you know? The kind that's more worried about appearances than real feelings. Odette, the mother-in-law, turned pale. I think I've never seen her so undone. And Raphael, my son, went through all the stages: shock, denial, anger. And finally, when he realized it was real, that I had truly taken control, he started begging. Mariana set her wine glass down, leaning forward with interest. And did you give in? I shook my head firmly. No. For years, I gave in to every whim, every manipulation. Not anymore. I told him they could stay in the Piñeros apartment, which belonged to my mother, a modest but decent place, and that they would receive an allowance enough to get by while they reorganized their lives. And how did he react to that? I let out a short laugh. How do you imagine? With indignation? An allowance? As if we were children, that's what he said. Ironic, isn't it? Considering that's exactly how he treated me all these years. Mariana nodded, her eyes shining with something that looked like pride. You know, Ivone, in all these years of friendship, I've never seen you so alive. It's like a flame has been reignited. That's exactly how I feel, Mari. Like I've awakened from a long stupor. I poured us more wine. But the most surprising thing was what happened next. After that. This morning, I went to Praca das Araucarias, as I always do. There, I met a lady named Helena. She's going through something similar, her son pressuring her to sell the house for the money. We talked briefly, I exchanged contacts with her, and there, sitting on that park bench, I had an epiphany. Mariana looked at me with curiosity. What kind of epiphany? I realized I'm not alone, that there are thousands of women like me out there. Widows, elderly, with children who see them only as a source of resources or a burden. And I thought, what if I could help them? What if I used my experience, my newly regained assets to make a difference? Mariana's eyes widened with understanding. The foundation, that idea you mentioned a few weeks ago, exactly. It wouldn't just be a financial reorganization, as I initially thought. It would be a real organization offering legal, psychological, and even financial support for elderly women who are victims of abuse by family members. A place where they could find their voice, support, and above all, respect. Mariana took my hands in hers, her eyes shining with emotion. Ivone, that's wonderful. You would turn your pain into purpose, your experience into help for others. I nodded, feeling a conviction grow within me. I've already started the process with Dr. Gustavo. Of course, it will be a long, bureaucratic process, but I have time, I have resources, and now I have determination. Our lunch stretched into the afternoon, filled with laughter, plans, and a few tears, not all of them from sadness. When Mariana finally said goodbye, promising to come back the next day to take care of my hair, I felt strangely light, as if a weight I had carried for years had finally been lifted. I barely had time to reorganize the kitchen when the doorbell rang again. I looked through the peephole and my heart skipped a beat. It was Raphael. For a moment, I considered not answering, but then I took a deep breath and opened the door. My son looked unrecognizable. His eyes were red and swollen, his hair disheveled, his usually impeccable clothes wrinkled as if he had slept in them. Mom, his voice was hoarse. Can we talk? I hesitated for a moment, but then stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Raphael looked around, as if rediscovering the apartment where he grew up. His eyes stopped on the picture of Antonio on the shelf. You haven't changed anything here, he commented. Some things are worth preserving, I replied simply. Others need to change. He nodded slowly, seeming to grasp the subtext. The apartment in Piñeros is smaller than I imagined. It's bigger than what many people have. I observed. It has 2 bedrooms, a spacious living room, a full kitchen. It was enough for my mother. It will be enough for you. Raphael looked away, visibly uncomfortable. Patricia isn't handling all of this well. She was used to a certain standard of living, a standard that wasn't sustainable or deserved, a standard built at my expense, with the sweat of your father's work. He didn't respond immediately. He sat on the couch, suddenly seeming much older than his 42 years. Why now, Mom? Why after all this time? The question hung in the air between us. I sat in the opposite chair, keeping a safe distance, because I finally understood that what you called love was control, that what you called care was manipulation, and as long as I allowed it, you would continue treating me like a senile child, incapable of making my own decisions. It wasn't like that. He protested weakly. No? Then tell me, Raphael, why did you sell the property in Atabea without consulting me? That place your father and I built with so much love, where we planned to spend our old age? He swallowed hard. It was a bad investment. It was losing money. That's a lie. I cut in, keeping my voice calm but firm. You sold it because you wanted the money to buy that boat, the one you rarely use but like to show off on social media. And what about the beach house you were celebrating yesterday? Did you buy it with the money from the stocks your father left? Stocks I didn't even know had been liquidated. Raphael lowered his head, unable to meet my gaze. I was going to tell you, I was going to make it up to you when? After I was in the grave, after I had sold or spent everything your father and I built over a lifetime? Tears began to stream down my son's face. For a moment, I saw in him the boy who once was vulnerable, in need of my love and protection, but then I remembered the laughter in the restaurant, the disdain, the years of small cruelties. What do you want, Raphael? Why did you come here? He lifted his face, his red eyes fixed on mine. I want another chance, Mom. I know I messed up, that we strayed off the path, but we are family. Blood of your blood. Family. I repeated slowly. Did you remember that when you left me alone in the hospital after my surgery, when you forgot my 65th birthday, when you laughed at me behind my back with your wife and mother-in-law? He had no answers to those questions, only silent tears that kept falling. The allowance I said is enough for you to live with dignity, though not in luxury. The apartment is clean, well located, furnished. If you need work, I can make a few calls. I still have contacts from the time your father was alive, but the control of the assets, Raphael, that doesn't go back into your hands. No, not after what you did to him and to me. And what if I change? What if I prove I can be the son you deserve? I looked at him for a long moment. There was no anger in me, just a quiet determination. Maybe over time we can rebuild our relationship, but it will be different now. Based on mutual respect, not manipulation, on true love, not interest, but that will depend more on you than on me. Raphael nodded slowly, seeming to understand, perhaps for the first time, the gravity of his actions and the determination behind mine. Can I hug you before I go? The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I hesitated. Then, slowly, I stood up and opened my arms. Raphael got up and wrapped me in a tight embrace, his body shaking with silent sobs. "I'm sorry, Mom," he murmured against my hair. "I'm sorry for everything," I didn't respond. I just let the hug last a few more seconds before gently pulling away. "Go home, Raphael, to your new home, reorganize your priorities, rethink your choices, and when you're ready for an honest conversation, without manipulation, I'll be here." After he left, I stood in the middle of the room, a whirlwind of emotions inside me. Part of me wanted to run after him, to say it was all right, that he could go back to his mansion, that I would once again erase myself to make his life easier. It was the maternal instinct speaking, the one that never completely disappears. But another part, the woman who had finally found her voice and her worth, knew this was the right path. Painful, yes, difficult, no doubt, but necessary. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Dr. Gustavo. "Dona Ivone, I'm sorry to call again, but I thought you'd like to know. We found a buyer interested in the property in Atabea. He's willing to sell it back for the same price he paid." Apparently, he didn't know the circumstances of the sale and was quite, let's say, embarrassed to find out. I felt a wave of emotion wash over me. The property, our refuge, the place where Antonio and I spent so many happy weekends, where we planned to grow old together. "That's wonderful, Doctor. Can we proceed with the negotiation?" "Certainly, I've already started the process. Hopefully, in a few weeks, the property will be back in your name." After hanging up, I walked to the balcony, watching the sun begin to set on the horizon of Sao Paulo. The city lights started to flicker on, creating a carpet of urban stars. I thought of Raphael, in his modest apartment in Pinheiros. I thought of Helena, the lady I met in the square. I thought of the foundation I was about to create. And for the first time in many years, I thought of myself, not as a mother, not as a widow, not as an elderly person to be tolerated, but as a woman with purpose, with a voice, with a future. The doorbell rang again. It was Antenor, punctual as always, for our afternoon coffee. When I opened the door, he presented me with a small bouquet of daisies, simple, unpretentious, genuine, just like him. "I brought flowers to match your smile," he said with that kindness that was his trademark. I accepted the bouquet, feeling a pleasant warmth spread through my chest. "Thank you, Antenor. Would you like to come in? I just made fresh coffee." As we sat on the balcony, watching the city slowly light up under the darkening sky, I realized that my confrontation with Raphael hadn't just been about money, property, or control. It had been about dignity, about allowing myself to be seen, heard, respected, about setting clear boundaries and consequences for when those boundaries were crossed. And although the road ahead was still uncertain, for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely hopeful, because I had finally found my voice. And that voice, I discovered, was much stronger than anyone, including myself, had ever imagined. 6 months had passed since that night at the Sabor Marte restaurant. Autumn had given way to winter, which in turn made way for spring. The trees in Praça das Araucárias, where I walked every morning, now displayed an explosion of colors, vibrant greens, soft yellows, with some touches of red in the flowers beginning to bloom. Just like nature, my life had also blossomed in ways I never thought possible at 67. That September morning, I woke up with the sun streaming through the cracks in the curtain. I was no longer in my apartment in the sod neighborhood, but at the farm in Atabaya, which I had managed to recover after long negotiations. The sound of birds replaced the urban symphony of honks and engines. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh coffee. I got up slowly, feeling my body protest with little aches, daily reminders that time doesn't stop. I put on a robe over my nightgown and walked to the wooden porch that surrounded the house. There I found Antenor already awake, sitting in a rocking chair, reading a book while sipping his coffee. "Good morning, sleepyhead." He smiled, marking the page and setting the book aside. "What time is it?" I asked, accepting the cup he offered me. "Almost 9. You needed to rest after yesterday's busy day." I nodded, remembering the official opening of the Novos Kaminhos Foundation the day before. After months of planning, endless meetings with lawyers, accountants, and social workers, we had finally opened the doors to the organization that had become my new life's purpose. The idea that emerged from that casual meeting with Helena in the square had transformed into something much bigger than I ever imagined. With Dr. Gustavo's help, I spoke with experts, researched similar models in other countries, and designed a structure that could truly make a difference in the lives of elderly women who were victims of financial and emotional abuse by their families. We had bought an old mansion in the Consolacao neighborhood and completely renovated it. The ground floor housed a communal space with a library, living room, and a small cafe. On the first floor, we set up offices for legal and psychological support. On the second, there were rooms for workshops and courses, from financial education to art and technology classes. Everything was designed to empower women who, like me, had been silenced, manipulated, treated as incapable by those who should love and protect them. "You seem deep in thought," Antenor observed, interrupting my daydreaming. I smiled, taking a sip of the perfectly brewed coffee, not too strong, not too weak, just how I liked it. Antenor had quickly learned my preferences, just as I had learned his. It was one of the many qualities that enchanted me about this man who entered my life so unexpectedly and transformatively. I'm thinking about how life takes turns. 6 months ago, I felt invisible, powerless, trapped in a web of manipulation I didn't even realize existed. Today, look at us. Antenor smiled, his eyes shining with that calm affection that comforted me so much. It wasn't a teenage passion that consumes and then fades. It was a mature feeling, built on mutual respect, companionship, and a deep understanding of the pains and joys that only come with the experience of a long life. Speaking of looking at us, he began adjusting himself in the rocking chair. "I've been thinking a lot about this lately, about us." I felt a flutter in my stomach, similar to what I felt in my teens when a boy approached to ask me to dance. It was funny how, even at 67, certain emotions remained unchanged by time. "And what have you been thinking?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Antenor took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I've been thinking that I really enjoy waking up next to you, sharing my days with you. These weekends at the country house have been, well, the happiest moments I've experienced in many years." I nodded, feeling a warm sensation spread through my chest, just like Antenor. And that's why he kept rummaging in the pocket of his robe and pulled out a small blue velvet box. "I wonder if you would accept making these moments our permanent routine. Not necessarily as husband and wife. Those formalities might not make sense for us at this stage of life, but as companions, partners, accomplices." He opened the box, revealing not a traditional engagement ring, but 2 simple silver bands, with small engravings I couldn't make out from a distance. Tears came before I could hold them back. They weren't tears of sadness, nor pure joy. It was a more complex feeling. Gratitude for the new beginning, a hint of melancholy for the lost years, and mainly a deep sense of being exactly where I was meant to be. "You don't need to answer now," he quickly added, noticing my emotion. "It's just an idea, an invitation. We can continue as we are, if you prefer." I wiped my tears with the back of my hand, laughing at my own emotionality. "Antenor Pixoto, at 71, you still manage to make me cry like a teenager." He smiled, his own emotions evident in his tear-filled eyes. It's a gift, he joked. I reached out to touch the velvet box. Can I see it up close? He nodded, handing me the small object. The rings were even more beautiful up close, polished silver with discreet engravings that, upon closer inspection, formed small continuous waves. Inside each ring, an inscription, "New Paths." The name of your foundation. Antenor explained. Because that's what we found together, right? It wasn't a new path. When we both thought we had reached the end of the road, I couldn't respond with words. I simply stood up, walked around the small table that separated us, and hugged him tightly. He returned the embrace, his solid and familiar body now a safe harbor that appeared when I least expected it, but when I needed it most. Is that a yes? He asked after a few moments, his soft voice against my hair. It's an absolute yes, I replied, pulling back just enough to look into his eyes, but with one condition. He raised his eyebrows, intrigued. What? That you come with me this afternoon. I have an important visit to make, and I would like you by my side. Antenor felt without hesitation. You know I would go with you to the ends of the earth, Ivone Medeiros. After a long breakfast on the porch, surrounded by the lush greenery of the country house, we prepared to return to the city. The visit I planned wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. It was time to close cycles, to turn wounds into scars, marks that remember the pain but no longer bleed. 2 hours later, we parked in front of a small building in the Pineros neighborhood. I took a deep breath several times, feeling Antenor's hand over mine, transmitting silent strength. Are you sure you want to do this? He asked softly. Absolutely, I replied, though my voice trembled slightly. It's time. The doorman recognized us immediately. I had been coming regularly for a few months, though I had never gone up to the apartment. I only left groceries, small gifts, letters I didn't know if were read. Today would be different. We took the elevator to the 4th floor. Every second felt like an eternity. When we finally stopped in front of apartment 42, my heart was pounding so hard I feared Antenor could hear it. I rang the doorbell. Footsteps approached from the other side, and then the door opened. Raphael looked different, thinner, with an unshaven beard he would never have allowed during his successful executive days. However, his eyes seemed clearer, more present. Upon seeing me, his expression shifted to a mix of surprise and restrained emotion. Mom, he said simply, his voice almost a whisper. Hello, son, I replied, keeping my composure despite the whirlwind of emotions. Can we come in? He nodded quickly, stepping aside. Sure. Sorry for the mess, I wasn't expecting visitors. The apartment was far from messy. It was modest compared to the mansion in Murumbai, but it was impeccably clean and organized. I noticed some changes since the last time I had been there, back when my mother was still alive. Newly painted walls, rearranged furniture, a few new plants in the windows. Would you like some coffee? Raphael offered, visibly nervous. That would be great, I replied. As he headed to the kitchen, I formally introduced Antenor. The two men greeted each other with tense cordiality, like two cautious animals sizing each other up. Is Patricia not here? I asked when Raphael returned with a tray holding 3 cups of coffee. A shadow crossed his face. Patricia doesn't live here anymore. She left about 3 months ago. Went back to her mother's. I nodded, not surprised. I had heard rumors through Mariana, whose network of information rivaled any intelligence service. According to her, Patricia couldn't handle the drop in status, the need to work for the first time in her life, the shame of having to explain to her friends why she no longer hosted parties in her mansion. I'm sorry, I said, and part of me truly felt it, not for the separation itself, which seemed inevitable given the circumstances, but for the pain my son must have experienced. Raphael shrugged, a gesture trying to convey indifference, but he couldn't completely hide the hurt. It was better this way. Our marriage, well, it was more about appearances than love. I think I always knew that, I just didn't want to admit it. We drank our coffee in silence, heavy with unspoken words, repressed emotions, unanswered questions. Finally, I set my cup down on the coffee table and looked directly at my son. Raphael, I came here today because I have something important to tell you, something to offer, actually. He looked at me with a mix of hope and apprehension. What? A position at the Novos Kaminhos Foundation. His expression shifted from surprise to confusion. Your foundation, the one for elderly women, he said. We need someone to coordinate the financial side. Someone who understands investments, asset management. Someone who can help our clients regain control of their assets, understand their rights, protect themselves from future manipulation. He stared at me, stunned. And you think that after everything I've done, precisely because of everything you did, I replied calmly. Who better to identify financial manipulation schemes than someone who has executed them? Who better to teach these women how to protect themselves than someone who knows all the tactics inside out? Raphael lowered his eyes, visibly moved. I don't deserve this, Mom. I don't deserve this trust. Maybe not. I agreed. My voice was soft, yet firm. But deserving and needing are different things. You need a purpose, a chance to make right the wrongs you've done. And the foundation needs someone with your skills. He stayed silent for long moments, processing my words. When he finally lifted his face, there were tears in his eyes, but also something I hadn't seen in a long time, determination, clarity. As I began, I allowed myself a small smile. Monday at 9, Dr. Gustavo will show you everything. But Raphael, I paused, making sure he understood the seriousness of what was to come. This is your last chance, one slip up, one lie. And it will be the end, not just of the work, but of our relationship. He felt the weight of that solemnly. I understand and promise, Mom, I won't disappoint you again. I didn't respond. Promises had been made before. Beautiful words spoken in moments of regret. Only time would tell if this time would be different. Before we left, I handed Raphael a small envelope. What's this? He asked, intrigued. The deeds to the property in Atabea, I replied, are now in a trust managed by the foundation. Neither you nor I can sell or transfer it. When I'm gone, it will be used for elderly women who need a refuge, a place of peace. But while I'm here, I'd like you to visit on weekends. The place holds many good memories. Maybe it's time to create new ones. Raphael held the envelope as if it were something precious and fragile. Thank you, Mom, for everything, for the chance, for the forgiveness. It's not forgiveness yet, son, I gently corrected him. It's a possibility for a fresh start. Forgiveness, like trust, will need to be rebuilt over time. As we left the building, Antenor wrapped his arm around my shoulders, a protective and affectionate gesture. Are you okay? I reflected for a moment before answering. I am. I don't know if it will work, if he really has changed, but I needed to give this chance, not just for him, but for me, to move forward without the weight of resentment. As we walked to the car, I looked at the sky in Sao Paulo, surprisingly blue that spring afternoon. The city remained chaotic, as always, horns, hurry, the frenetic pace that never slowed down, but inside me, there was a new serenity. I thought about the foundation, the women we were already helping. I thought of Helena, the lady I met in the square, now one of the most dedicated volunteers. I thought of Antenor and the new chapter we were about to start together. I thought of Raphael and the fragile but possible chance for rebuilding, and I thought of myself, no longer the invisible woman, the widow accepting crumbs of attention, the mother who erased herself to avoid bothering anyone, but Ivone Medeiros, 67 years old, a woman who had finally found her voice, her purpose, her strength. That night at the restaurant Sabor e Marte, when I saw my son laughing at me with his wife and mother-in-law, it could have been just another episode of silent humiliation, another wound to swallow in the name of family love. Instead, it became the catalyst for a transformation I never thought possible. You know, I said to Antenor as he opened the car door for me. I think we should have dinner there again someday. Where? He asked, confused. At Sabor a Marte. The restaurant where it all began. I'd like to go in there not as a victim, but as a winner. To close the cycle. Antenor smiled. That smile lit up his eyes and warmed my heart. I think it's an excellent idea. We can celebrate our new beginning. As the car glided through the streets of Sao Paulo towards a future I had chosen for myself, I felt a deep gratitude for that night 6 months ago, for the pain that turned into strength, for the humiliation that became purpose, for the betrayal that paved the way for new and true connections. Life, I discovered at 67, doesn't end when we are betrayed. In fact, sometimes it's exactly when it truly begins. My life changed completely that night at the Sabor a Marte restaurant. Who would have thought that at 67 I would discover a strength I didn't even know existed within me? I am Ivone Medeiros, and this story I've shared with you is not just about a family betrayal or regaining financial control. It's about rediscovering one's worth when the world seems determined to make us forget it. That moment when I saw my son Raphael, my daughter-in-law Patricia, and my co-mother-in-law Odette laughing at me in the restaurant was the breaking point. As a retired nurse, I spent my life caring for others. As a mother, I always put my son first. As a widow, I tried to keep alive the memory and values that my husband Antonio and I built together. And as a reward, I was treated like an inconvenience, an old fool who could be manipulated and discarded. But that night changed everything. Instead of bowing my head and swallowing another humiliation, I decided to act. The plan I had devised with Dr. Gustavo Macedo was put into action, and within minutes, the house of cards my son had built with my money came crashing down. Accounts were frozen, cards cancelled, properties reclaimed. The expression on their faces when they realized what was happening. I confess I felt a satisfaction I never imagined I could feel. It wasn't revenge, it was justice being served, it was balance being restored. The months that followed were of profound transformation. Raphael and Patricia had to move to a modest apartment in Pinheiros, living on an allowance that covered the basics but not the luxuries they were used to. Their marriage didn't survive the drop in status. Patricia returned to her mother's house when she realized the life of a wealthy man's wife was over. Meanwhile, I was thriving. With Dr. Gustavo's help, I regained full control of my assets. I managed to repurchase the farm in Atabea, that special place where Antonio and I had spent so many happy moments. And more importantly, I founded the Novos Caminhos Foundation, an organization dedicated to helping elderly women who are victims of financial and emotional abuse by family members. And I wasn't alone on this journey. Antenor Pixoto, the kind bookstore owner I met by chance, became my companion, my confidant, my love and maturity. At 67 and 71, we discovered that it's never too late to start over, to find a new path when we thought the road had ended. Even my relationship with Raphael had a chance for a new beginning. I offered him a position at the foundation, not out of maternal sentimentality, but because his skills could help protect other women from the kind of manipulation he himself had practiced. A chance for redemption, not guaranteed, but possible. What did I learn on this journey? Respect is not begged for, it is earned. True love does not diminish, it elevates. Our voice matters, regardless of age, and it's never too late to change the course of our own story. Today, at 67, I am happier and more fulfilled than ever. I split my time between my apartment in the city and my country house in Atabea, between my work at the foundation and precious moments with Antenor. I have a purpose that motivates me to get up every morning. I have a voice that I now know how to use, and I take satisfaction in knowing that my story is helping other women find their own strength. And you, who have followed me this far, who felt with me the pain of betrayal and the joy of liberation, what will you do with your own life? What limits do you need to set? What voice do you need to reclaim? What power do you need to regain? I've been through a lot in life, my dear ones. I lost my husband after 40 years together. I was betrayed by my only son. I was treated like a burden, like someone without value. But I am here, stronger, wiser, more determined to live each day to the fullest. If you identify with my story, if you have also been disrespected, manipulated, or underestimated by those who should love you, know that you are not alone. And more importantly, know that you can change this situation. You can rediscover your strength, your voice, your worth. You can transform your pain into purpose, just as I did. Don't keep this message to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. It's never too late to start over, to assert yourself, to bloom. Comment below with your own story or how you felt watching mine. Your comments mean a lot to me. I read each one. I am moved by every word of support. I gain strength knowing that my experience is helping others. If you've made it this far and haven't subscribed to the channel yet, what are you waiting for? Click the red button right now. This way, you won't miss any of the life stories I share here. Real, intense, transformative stories. Next week, I will tell you how I reconnected with a love from my youth after 70. It's another story that will touch your heart, I promise. And if this channel has been important to you, if these stories have helped you in any way, consider supporting our work through Value DECISIVE. It's a way to donate that helps us cover production costs and allows us to bring more videos daily. Every contribution, no matter how small, makes a huge difference. With your support, we can continue sharing stories that inspire, that move, that transform lives. Making this video wasn't easy. Reliving those moments, exposing my wounds, sharing my journey. It all takes courage and vulnerability, but it's worth it when I receive your messages, when I read your comments, when I know my story is helping others find their own strength. Always remember, life doesn't end when we are betrayed. Sometimes, that's exactly when it truly begins. This is Dona Ivone from the channel, thanking you for your company and hoping to see you again in the next video. A warm hug to your heart.